In our continued efforts to educate the public about Black history in South Carolina outside of Black History Month, we bring this segment of Beyond February to you with the purpose of not only sharing a piece of our history, but to ask for your help. The Palmetto Cemetery was established in 1920 and was one of the first cemeteries in the city where African Americans could be laid to rest. Throughout the decades, it was a treasured jewel in the Black community. Now, times have changed and it has mostly been forgotten, except for a chosen few who have dedicated themselves to making sure our loved ones are resting in a beautiful place that friends, family, and lovers of heritage can enjoy when they come to visit. The Palmetto Cemetery Association was created in the 1940s to assist in the management and the beautification of the cemetery. The association acquired the ownership of the cemetery through a deed when the cemetery changed ownership. I recently visited the cemetery and spent some time with Harold White, the executive director of the association, to find out more about this historical place and the challenges that they face in keeping the final resting place of many of our loved ones beautiful. Mr. White, how are you doing this evening?
Fine, thank you. Beautiful day out here.
It is lovely out here. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. Wanted to start off, could you tell us a little bit about Palmetto Cemetery?
Sure. The Palmetto Cemetery was originally owned by Willis Johnson, who was the owner of Johnson's Funeral Home. The funeral home was established in 1915 by Willis Johnson. He purchased this property of the cemetery, Palmetto Cemetery, 17.5 acres in 5 years later in 1920. As I said, Mr. Johnson operated the funeral home and the cemetery and all until his death. Upon his death, E. Perry Palmer became the owner of the cemetery, as well as buying the Johnson Funeral Home, which name changed to Palmer Funeral Home. Mr. Palmer continued to operate these facilities until his death, which been about five or 6 years ago, my exact date. Back in the 1940s, mid-40s, Willis Johnson started the Palmetto Cemetery Association. It was his desires at that time that those who had loved ones or have some attachment to the cemetery would come together and assist in the upkeeping and beautification of the cemetery. Obviously, the Palmetto Cemetery is not a perpetual care cemetery. The owners of the cemetery land is those who buy the plots for burial purposes, and that also they may become members of the association. In the late 1960s, I became involved in the cemetery because by that time, my brother was buried out here, a cousin was buried out here, and subsequently my mother and my father are buried out here. So I have 4 very dear, loving family members who are buried here. I got involved with the Cemetery Association, like I say, in the 70s under E. Perry Palmer at the time. And at that time, Palmer again was the owner, and we assisted, we being the association, with a lot of help from E. Perry Palmer, trying to keep it up. Upon his death, which has been 4 or 5 years ago, I think, but upon his death, the association carried on trying to keep the cemetery up. The cemetery itself was purchased a couple of years ago by Mr. Palmer's niece, Laura Palmer. And she purchased the business, the funeral home, but did not purchase or in any way associated with the cemetery. The cemetery later was deeded to the Palmetto Cemetery Association, a nonprofit organization. And that's who I'm working with, the Palmetto Cemetery Association, as its executive director. And our purpose is to try to maintain the upkeep of this Palmetto Cemetery. Our only means of income is by those who make contributions to the association, those who have loved ones and others, but have a concern about the cemetery, makes contributions. And then it becomes, what we try as an association is to keep it up. The 17.5 acres land is one of which sits on the site where in the middle of that 17.5 acres is a pond that runs through it, and it declines down to that pond. That area has the pond falls into the drainage of the Columbia Water Company. We as an association try to ask those who have loved ones buried out here, or those who have just an interest in helping us keep it up, would do so. It's voluntary. We can't force anybody to do it. So at this time, when we try to take care of these 17.5 acres, if we do the entire cemetery when the growing season occurs, which is spring through summer into the fall, it costs us $3,200 a cutting for the entire cemetery. If we take away the bottom part where that water falls into, it's then $2,400 for the rest of the cemetery. At this point, like in your yard, when the summer or the growing season, it grows. So what our hopes and goals that we're still working towards doing is to have a minimum of 8 cuts a year. And with 4 of those cuts being the entire cemetery, and the others as areas in which we can do it. Unfortunately for us, we have this association. We ask those who have loved ones here to join our association. Dues for membership in this association is $50 a year for individuals. Those who have families contribution is $100 a year. And then we have others who may want to give more meaningful contribution to help us. We appreciate it. Unfortunately, our membership list is by dues paying is very, very, very minimum. Because of what is now happening in the cemetery business, as you well know, recently, and I say recently in the last few years, Fort Jackson now has a cemetery that those who have served in the military can bury loved ones there. And that's a good thing, a good thing. Prior to Fort Jackson, many of those came to Palmetto and other cemeteries in the greater Columbia area. So the military, and again, rightfully so, very deserving, we get very, very few bodies from the military. With the other cemeteries in the area, it's pretty good competition for it. So at this point, we are really suffering, and I use that word very, very strongly. We are really suffering to be able to keep the cemetery in a position in which we all will be proud because we have loved ones here. And again, that's the association objective. Everything goes towards that. And we need help. We need help. We need members. We need those others who have an interest to just help us with it. Right now, we need help.
Mr. White, tell me, why is this cemetery so important?
Well, It's one of the oldest cemeteries for blacks in this area. There's a couple others that may have been a little before this one or shortly after this one. But it's I think I'm fair in saying from the early days particularly, it's one of the largest ones. And because of the popularity back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so forth, most of the 17th acres that Mr. Johnson originated with, most of it is now occupied. So because we're dealing with now the third and fourth, maybe even fifth generation, we don't seem to have that togetherness for folks who were back in the 40s and the 50s, and even when I got involved in the 70s. I guess now I represent probably the senior members and my age group in this. As I mentioned earlier, with my mom, dad, and others, it now falls on my generation. We need leadership, and for those who are younger, to join us only for the purpose of making the place where our loved ones are resting representative of those that show our love and appreciation for those who have now gone above.
Was Palmetto Cemetery, was this one of the first cemeteries that African Americans could be buried in?
My understanding it is. Randolph Cemetery, I think, is the oldest,
Yes.
Where blacks were buried. I can be corrected on this. I think Palmetto is next to it. I can definitely say when Mr. Johnson in 1915 bought this property, it was definitely one of the first. But to my understanding, Randolph may be a little bit older, but I don't think it's as large as this one. And most of the others have come along within the last 50 years or so.
Mr. White, is there a phone number that someone could call if they wanted to reach out and get some more information or find out what they can do to help?
It really is. That number is my number, and that number is area code 803-606-1890. 803-606-1890. And please feel free to give me a call at any time. And happy to have those who have any kind of interest in the cemetery to share with me, and we ask for your support.
Mr. White, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this treasure, piece of our history in Columbia.
Thank you for doing this for us.